Welcome back to another episode of the Sky Society podcast. Today, I am chatting with Leora Kahn. She is the Senior Brand Marketing Manager at solidcore. Welcome, Leora.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm very excited to pick your brain throughout your career journey of how you ended up here at solidcore. Leora has a lot of experience at kind of smaller startups before she moved over here. So excited to kind of go through your journey and what you learned along the way. But before we do all of that, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm Leora. I am currently at solidcore as the Senior Brand Marketing Manager. But before solidcore, I had been at a few other smaller brands doing all sorts of different marketing kind of initiatives. And I transparently didn't really know what I wanted to do in marketing at the beginning of my career. I grew up dancing. I was super creative and I knew I wanted like a creative career path, but I didn't know what that meant. So when I got to college, my college had a really great business school, and I thought, why not go into business and see how I can make it more creative there? Um, and that's what led me to choose marketing. I ended up studying abroad, and I know it sounds super cliche, like every other study abroad student, but it did change my life, and I really had a greater appreciation for so many things, which I will touch on later in my career journey. But after school, I ended up working for a home remodeling business. And I'm super, super grateful for my time there. It's kind of my introduction to strong women leaders in marketing. And I had a really great leader there who I'm still very dear friends with. And I learned so much, but I also learned that, roofing and home remodeling wasn't for me. It wasn't really my passion point. And so I kind of stopped and thought, what does make me happy? Like, what do I want to get into marketing? And I really loved when I studied abroad in Belgium, the artful pairing of food and beer. I thought it was so interesting. And so I actually just did some research to find like local breweries near me. I knew I wanted like a small business kind of space. And I found a local brewery that needed marketing help. So I joined there, and they had one location, and I helped open the second. And I did all sorts of things in marketing, from influencers to social to email, web, events. We hosted like beer festivals. It was quite the experience. Um, and I really liked it. But I then wanted to kind of take on some other clients on the side, kind of tackle my imposter syndrome, see if I could do it by myself. Had a great time, but I was hungry for more structure and a full-time role again, which is what led me to solidcore.
Amazing. It's so I like how you mentioned study abroad because I do think that I do know you're like, well, it's cliche, I could change my life, but I do think that it does sometimes alter how you perceive kind of what you really like. And I think maybe you ended up at that beer company, that maybe that wouldn't have been something that was on your radar if you hadn't have done that experience. I am excited because I want to also dive back into that first role where you said you worked in home remodeling, because that's not the most glamorous thing that maybe you thought you would be wanting to do. But I love how you mentioned that it was something where you learned a lot. So we're going to rewind here in just a second and talk about how those previous roles really shaped who you are now. But before we do that, I kind of want to touch a little bit at your current role at solidcore. Can you give us a brief explanation of solidcore for those who don't know, and then tell us kind of what your role entails now as the Senior Brand Marketing Manager?
Absolutely. So, for those of you who are not too familiar with solidcore, we are a strength training workout on a Pilates inspired machine. And it's challenging. It's a challenging workout. I'll be the first to say it. And I know it's not for everyone, but it really is for those who find joy in the work, who really want that hard work, that challenge. And that kind of carries over into like the day to day on the HQ side as well. We all are really passionate about the product and we love what we do. And it's really great to just see how working for a product that genuinely affects your mental and physical well-being just affects the community that you're part of. So that's who we are.
I've never personally taken a solidcore class, which I've been wanting to try because so many of my friends here in Austin have done it and really love it. They also say the same thing, like it is such a hard workout. And I'm imagining, since Pilates, I think recently has also been a rising trend, and I know your workout, like you said, is Pilates inspired. Has there been a lot of growth recently, just as we've kind of seen this workout become more and more popular?
Definitely. And we'll have to get you into a class as soon as
I
possible so you can try it for
know.
yourself. But yeah, I think it's been really great to see the Pilates trend on the rise. And we actually recently did a rebrand in 2022 to talk about who we are to really own strength training, because I think a lot of people were coming in thinking we were Pilates, and it's a rude awakening because it's not slow, it's quite loud, it's fast transitions. And so, yeah, I think it's really interesting to see people who enjoy Pilates and they want to come try solid core and they're like, oh, I like this too. It's really challenging in the best way.
So it's more weights focused, is that correct? More strength train, more or more, sorry, more strength training focused.
Yes, it's like resistance training. So it's a little bit, yes, it's a little bit more challenging than your traditional Pilates class.
Which I also think I'm starting to see more and more girls realize that that's really important. I think before a lot of girls are like, I'm not going to do strength training. We're just going to do cardio, and that's how we're going to get fit. But
Yes.
I've been loving how that's been more of a trend for women specifically of just doing more strength training. So that's
Oh,
awesome. You
yes.
guys are able to combine both.
I love the myth busting. One of my favorite things to do is to bring in, traditional quote unquote strong gym bros who want to try Pilates, and they are quickly humbled. So
I
it's
love seeing those
awesome.
videos of like the whatever, like girl, I take my boyfriend to Pilates and he's like big and muscular, but he's dying, like dying.
Yes, exactly. So I love it. We have all sorts of people coming through the doors. And we like to say we welcome everyone. We know it's not for everyone, but if you're up for the challenge, you're going to fit right in.
So, talk to me a little bit about your progression here at Solid Core. So, you started here, and so you started there as a social media manager, then went to a brand manager, and are now a senior marketing manager. First of all, incredible that you were able to progress so quickly within 3 years. That is really inspiring just to see how I'm assuming how ambitious and hardworking you have been at Solid Core to be able to make that career progression. But I'd love to hear what that was like for you and how you kind of found your way towards brand marketing.
Thank you. That's a great question. Yeah, so started in social media. I was hired actually right at the tail end of 2020. So when I was hired, we were a scrappy team of two. And today we
Really?
have,
That's
yes.
crazy.
Yeah, on the marketing side specifically, we were a team of
Uh-huh.
two. And we now have 11 people on the team. So
Wow.
it's been really kind of beautiful to watch us grow and transform. And I'm really proud of where we are today. But yeah, when I first started, it was a social media manager position. And it was one of those things where it was like, oh, it's cool you have design experience, but we probably won't have you use it. And then 6 months in, I was making billboards for our West Coast expansion in LA. So if I have advice for anyone, it's like, you know, just try to do new things. You never know where it's going to get you.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think just throughout the years and the transitions on our team, I learned that while I love social media and I'm super, super, super grateful for my time in social, it allowed me to have this insight and this connection to our consumers that I would venture to say a lot of others don't necessarily have. As being the one in social, I'm in the DMs, I'm in the comments, I'm talking to our consumer every day, and I'm getting to know their wants and needs super well. And it allowed me to be more hungry for a position that was, the 360 view of marketing, not just one channel. Um, and so after kind of voicing my thoughts on growth and evolving, it allowed me to work with people cross functionally and grow into this more brand marketing role. And yeah, just was recently promoted to the senior brand marketing role. So excited to continue this evolution.
Congratulations. That is
Thank
so
you.
exciting. What is the biggest difference you think you've seen since being on a team of two and doing all of the marketing to now being on a team of 11 and now that you're in senior leadership? How has that kind of shifted what marketing looks like or kind of how I know obviously your title has changed, but is it significantly different now working on a larger team versus a smaller team?
Definitely. And all good things. I think I've learned a ton of lessons when we were super scrappy. But I'm super grateful that we have now such a large dedicated team. We almost have, a person per channel at this point, and it allows us to be so much more collaborative, so much more strategic. We can think big picture, we can plan ahead. It kind of took us from that jump to super startup mentality to rising to a larger organization. And yeah, I'm super grateful for the team we have now. We also have really great agency partners, which allow us just to reach even higher heights. Um, and yeah, I think when we were a team of two, I had my hands in a lot of different things. And now being a team of 11, I'm able to focus more on brand evolution and pushing our brand to the next place. Um, yeah,
And with solid core, so one of the things, even though, like, for at least from what I've heard about solid core and what I've seen, is that your community is so strong and your brand is so strong. And we talked about this a little bit before, but the people that go to solid core love solid core. Like, they love it. It is, their thing. They want to talk about it. And I think that's very rare to have brand advocates that are so strong, right? Because we may, you may go to, there's an Orange Theory across the street from you. You may go to Orange Theory and you may like it, but you're probably not like, posting about it while you're there, or always talking about it, or wanting to wear the logo or the merch or anything like that. But solid core is really different, where there's a lot of brand loyalty. I'm curious if that's part of your strategy when it comes to building your brand, or how you kind of look at building such a strong brand affinity.
yeah, great question. I think we are super lucky to have such strong brand advocates and brand loyalists. And it honestly just speaks to the product. I think I like to say if you drink the Kool-Aid, like the girls that get it. When you try this workout, like the results speak for itself, not just physically, but mentally. It has pushed me farther than I ever thought possible, outside of the blue lights, we like to say. Um, and so working for a brand that has such strong brand advocates is something that we definitely don't take for granted. When we want to talk to our consumers, it's pretty easy to reach out and talk to them, get their opinions, and build campaigns and strategies based on what the feedback they're providing us. Um, so yeah, it's pretty great to be able to have those type of brand advocates. And we actually, it's funny when I do influencer marketing, I talk about this often because I've never worked for a product where influencers are so eager to come in and try our class and post about it. And it's honestly great. And it makes my job a lot easier when I care about the product as well.
Yeah.
Because I want to see it succeed. I've seen it change lives. And yeah, it's really great to just have a product that people are genuinely passionate for.
Yeah, I think it's also very motivating to work for a brand when, when consumers are really excited and really passionate about it. Kind of going back to how we talked about how just solid core has grown so much. I think you're at over 100 locations now, and your marketing team has grown. I think a natural progression as you get bigger is you have, really strong brand advocates, but obviously sometimes you're going to have to deal with negative comments or just negative perception and stuff on social. I'm curious to how if you've experienced that and how you've navigated, if you do get any type of negative, I don't know how to call it. I always like to say in social media now, everybody's always so harsh. So whatever. Sometimes I remember we talked to the PR manager at Duolingo, and we talked about how they're doing so amazing, but then one video can potentially be perceived wrong. And then there has to be this kind of like whole thing to kind of go after it. Have you noticed there kind of be a change as Solid Core has grown, and kind of how have you addressed maybe if there is any negative commentary you're getting on social?
I think that anytime you work for a brand, there's going to be some negative comments along the way, especially when you work for a product that, again, may not be for everybody. And I think that's totally fine. I think we know we're not for everybody, but those that do love us and keep coming back for more, um, they are the biggest kind of brand advocates we can ask for. And so I haven't had to deal with too much negativity or harsh comments. And when we do our best to brush them off and keep moving forward because there are people that love us. And I think the rapid growth speaks for itself. Like you said, we have over 100 locations.
Yeah.
We're just getting started too. I think global expansion is like right around the corner. So
Yeah. That's super exciting. Yeah, I was just curious to ask because I noticed too with Sky Society, obviously we're not nearly as big as Solid Core, but as we've grown, it's been the same, right? All of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, now the more people that love you, then obviously you're going to have the opposite as well. And so it's kind of interesting to navigate, I think, as a brand grows and trying to kind of figure out how to respond in those situations. Okay. You're doing amazing things here at Solidcore. I want to come back and talk about kind of your favorite parts of your job and kind of what you're most excited about for your role. But I want to take a pause from Solidcore and I want to rewind back to earlier in your career and just talk about your career progression, because obviously you're doing something right if you were able to move so quickly throughout your career. So I want to pick your brain a little more. So can you take me back to this first role that you got out of college? I know you mentioned that this was your first taste of having really strong female leaders. This is where you got a lot of experience, even though you realized that it wasn't quite for you. So tell me kind of about what this role entailed and what you learned while you were there.
Yeah, happy to. So I started as a marketing intern at this home remodeling company, and I learned all sorts of things about integrated marketing. I was primarily focused on, I think, community marketing. It's also been, I think, 8 years at this point, so I'm trying to remember the specifics of this internship. But after the internship, I was brought on full time. And I, again, just specialized in integrated marketing. It was, I think, our first experience of really working through like CRM journeys and knowing our audience and targeting specifically to what they want. Which again, super grateful for my time there. My first boss there was a strong, independent woman. She has since, excuse me, started her own marketing company. And we talk often about just like different strategies and the clients that she has bringing on. And it's great to stay connected. But I think part of my role there was also community marketing. And that's kind of where I first fell in love with like the benefit of having a strong community rally behind your product and really like taking marketing from a national perspective to a personal perspective and really knowing your consumer. But at the end of the day, while I was learning so much, I was not passionate about roofing or kitchen remodels or flooring needs. And I think it speaks volumes when you're able to really connect to the product you're marketing for. And I know I feel super lucky to be able to do that now. And not everyone has that ability to work for a product and a brand they truly believe in. But I do think that when you're able to work for a product you do believe in, you give it your all and you're able to make that much better content and results.
I similarly, when I started my career, I started at a home service company and it was not glamorous at all. Like I'm not the target market, I'm not a consumer, but similar to your story, I learned so much in that role. And so I really, really value my time there. And I love sharing stories like yours because I think so many recent graduates or just women starting their career want to start at Solid Core, or they want to start at Road, or they want to start at whatever the big names are at the time. And it absolutely is possible. But those opportunities are few and far between. And when you start off your career like that, you were honest with yourself and said, okay, this is not where I want to be. I'm not going to be here forever. So I'm going to take the next step and go do what I love. But that it's okay when you're earlier in your career to take those roles because you really get to learn a lot and that can help you advance your career later on.
Totally, completely agree. And I think that was a tough pill to swallow too. When you are graduating college, it's like, I want to work for the big companies of the world. And I think
Yeah.
it's really about refining your skill set, making connections, building relationships, and doing the hard work to get to where you want to go.
So most of your roles have been in startup environments. And I know Solid Core, since you started when they were smaller, they're still growing very rapidly. So we'll call them startup-esque a little bit. What kind of has your experience been working at startups throughout your career? Or what do you think that it has taught you that maybe larger corporations would not have been able to?
I love that question. I think a lot of marketers have different opinions about generalizing versus specializing, but I tell everyone I come in contact with that I loved being a general marketing specialist at the beginning because I was able to touch so many different things. I tell all the coordinators I work with to be a sponge, to absorb as much as you can. Being at smaller companies allows you to be in the room with larger execs you may not otherwise get the opportunity to at a larger corporation. And really trust your gut. You know, if you're hired at this role, like you're meant to be there, and don't be afraid to show up and show out. And ask the hard questions. I think you don't know what you don't know. And it's really important and crucial to be curious in your field.
I I love that because I think more people need to kind of hear that advice, especially when you're young in your career. It is so valuable, and you're definitely not the first guest that I've come across that has shared similar advice. But I do think, like I said, it's a tough pill to swallow because we want the very glamorous social media, like shareable type role when you first start, but not all roles are going to be like that. But I think that if you prioritize learning, just like how you said, I think that takes you so far in your career. One thing I'm also curious of your experience of being someone that says, well, I know you kind of mentioned soaking up things like a sponge. So you want to be a yes man in the way where you want to say yes to lots of opportunities, but do you ever find that you also struggle with saying no, or have you ever kind of had to find that balance?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I think something I've learned recently in my career, especially in the startup space, is be a sponge, absorb everything you can, but do your best not to be a yes man. I would say pause, think, and be strategic. Is what I'm about to say yes to going to move the needle? Is it actually affecting my career and the business I work for? Or is it easier to say yes? Because sometimes it is easier to say yes, but it's actually not going to be beneficial. So it's something I'm still working on, and I think a lot of young women in their careers are working on, but it's more of a yes and it's not a immediate yes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of phrasing it because I there's kind of two sides to the coin of you want to do as much as you can to get as much experience and exposure, but then also not burning yourself out, not taking on too much. And I think finding that balance is really hard. I think especially when you're young and you're so hungry and you want to do so much that it can be really difficult. Or if you work remote and blurring those lines of like, when do I stop work? When do I start? And so I
Totally.
think it's definitely a skill to pick up of like when to say no versus when to say yes.
Absolutely. And I think also just from my experience, and I would guess a lot of other women in marketing and in the corporate world, sometimes it's easier to say yes than it is to say no. And something I've learned recently is to lead with empathy and just assume kind intent, assume that people want the best for you. And if you're going to say no, it's not a personal attack. It's for a reason, and that's okay.
I love that. Okay, Leah, one other thing I'm curious as we're going through your career progression before a solid core is that you've worked in essentially three different industries because you went from like remodeling to a brewery to then now kind of the health, fitness, wellness space. I get questions a lot about girls who want to transition industries. They're working in tech, they want to go into fashion, they're working in recruiting, they want to go into beauty or whatever those transitions are. As you've gotten these different roles, what have you learned about being able to position your experience to a new industry? Have you found it difficult switching industries, or what advice do you have for someone that's looking to make a switch like that?
Great question. I think it's about as many parallels as you can draw between the two. I would urge you to do so. So, for example, I don't think looking at fitness and looking at food and bev, you wouldn't think they go together necessarily, but there is
Mhm.
an angle there, right? Like there's nutrition, there is health and wellness. They kind of tie into both. Maybe not beer per se, but
Yeah,
the
I was gonna
food,
say.
but the food
It does
part.
get pair together, you know.
I mean, some people do beer and yoga, so
Yeah.
there's some parallels there. Um, but I think it's like your skill and how your skills transition from one industry to the other. And if I've learned anything about brand marketing, it's being a storyteller. So you have to have your own brand. It's how you position yourself. So, for example, being from the beer industry to the fitness industry, like how does one make that jump? And I talked a lot about just knowing the consumer and being consumer obsessed and really understanding what the consumer wants and selling myself that I can do those skills in any industry I go to. So that would be my advice.
That's really good advice, and I hope alleviates some fear or imposter syndrome of any of our listeners who are trying to switch industries. Because a lot of times I hear people say, "Well, I don't think I can because I don't have any experience in that industry." But I think once you start with the marketing experience, then you can find that it can be transferable. You also mentioned selling yourself. Do you have any advice when it comes to interviewing and selling yourself? Or maybe now that you are in senior leadership and you maybe are more involved in hiring, any advice there for interviews?
It's a great question, too. Um, I think always do your homework. Definitely know who you're talking to. Come prepared. ask a lot of questions. I'm a big question asker. I think asking questions gets you the context, it gets you the why behind what you want to know, behind what you're doing. And I think it's super crucial. Something else I learned later in my career, which applies to interviews, but also just like your day to day, is radical candor. So I think it's challenging directly, but caring personally at the same time. So if you're in an interview, I think obviously it's a role that you want, but it's how are you able to show the interviewee, or excuse me, interviewer, that you will benefit them at the same time.
Mm.
So really, don't be afraid to challenge, ask questions, and really show your worth.
And all of your roles that you get by applying on job boards, or were they referrals or connections that you had?
My first role was through a connection. My second role was just applying online, and solidcore was also just applying online.
Wow. Okay. So there is hope because we're
There's
we're
hope.
we're myth busting here because I mean I get asked so many questions all the time. So I
I'm
always love
sure.
asking my guests because I like getting other perspectives. But I think there's also it's like, oh my gosh, well, I can't get hired at one of these companies if I don't have a recommendation there. Like it's just useless. But I like how you're kind of showing that
Yeah,
you can do both. You can apply online and you can still get noticed and still get the role.
definitely. And I think it's totally discouraging at sometimes to feel that way, but also shoot your shot. You never know what's going to happen.
Okay, another question here on this like job or like this job searching area is one thing I've noticed on your LinkedIn, because I have your LinkedIn pulled up as we're talking, is you are very descriptive about each of your work experiences. And I see a range with podcast guests. Some people just have nothing, they just have the companies, and some are more on your end where you list a lot of those things. Do you find that having more descriptions there under your work experiences helps recruiters better find you or helps you more when you're applying to jobs on LinkedIn? Or any thoughts there?
It's a great question. I don't know if I can speak to mine in terms of success with recruiters, but I can tell you that when I'm looking for people to join my team, I really appreciate the
Mhm.
detail. I really appreciate experiences and if they're able to speak to those, because I think there's a lot of fancy words you can use on LinkedIn. And if you can actually speak to it, I think it takes the guessing out of it, which I enjoy.
Yeah. Okay. Very, because I'm always just curious as some do more and some do less. I always think it's important to have it on there because you never know who's going to come across you and what opportunity.
Right.
Like I found you for a podcast. I probably would not have done that if I couldn't go through and see all your experience. So you never know what opportunities will kind of come your way if you spend some time actually filling out your LinkedIn profile. And even you're doing a really good job too, updating it for all of your current roles. I think sometimes when you're really happy in a role, people are like, well, I'm not going to go update my LinkedIn because I don't need to. But then you forget what you've done. You forget what you've done in each of those roles. And
Totally.
then 3, 4 years later, you're like, okay, well, now I have to update it, but you're going to forget. So I also love how yours is updated for all of your specific promotions you've had at solidcore. That is amazing.
Thank you so much. And I agree. I think if I weren't on top of it, I would also forget. So
Yeah.
it's something I try to stay on top of.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about go back to solid core and just talk about what you are most excited for. But before I do that, is there anything else you kind of want to chat about at these two, these two larger roles you had at the remodeling company and then the brewery of kind of what you've learned throughout your career journey? I know it's kind of been a couple years back, but any other advice that you have or any other lessons learned that you want to share?
I think looking back at my roles, I think it's really important just to make real human connections along the way. I think it's always great to grow in your career, but it's a small world. You never know who you're going to look back on and want to have a connection with. So I think it's really crucial just keep up with your previous experiences and just stay up to date with them.
Do you have any, I'm gonna dig in more. Do you have any tips for staying connected? Because sometimes I also get asked, it's like, oh, I want to stay connected with my boss, that I worked at 5 years ago, but like, how do I do that? Like, do you send a message once a year? Are you just like casually updating them? Or do you have any advice for kind of maintaining those connections long term?
I love that. I think it's probably different based on if you're like geographically close with them, but a lot of my previous managers, unfortunately, aren't super close. Um, I text them, I email them, I call them. I feel like I had very close relationships with them because I was at such small, intimate companies that could differ at a larger organization. I can't speak to that, unfortunately. But my first boss, I went to her wedding. Like we talk pretty often. And I've had a few leaders at Solidcore that have come and gone, and we stay up to date with one another and update each other on life. And I think it's really special. I look to them as mentors, whether they know that or not. But I'm really appreciative of those relationships in my life.
Yeah, I think it is so important. And I think it is difficult if, if you're moving throughout your career. I think more jobs are remote and you can't just go be like, hey, you want to go catch up and grab a coffee? Like that's not really possible. But I think you make a good point there of just like putting in the effort, depending on what feels probably most comfortable with each of those people, whether that's text, phone, or email, just to make sure, because you never know when you're going to cross paths again.
Exactly.
Okay, Leora. So going back now to your role here as Senior Brand Marketing Manager for SolidCore, can you first give a little overview of what your role entails as a brand marketing manager, just to give some more insight as to kind of if that's a career path that someone's interested in, what that looks like?
Absolutely. So, my current role at SolidCore, I lead brand marketing campaigns. So, for example, right now we're in our current campaign that's called Fail With Us. And so, what we do is we have a campaign, and as a brand marketer, you see how can I make this campaign come to life across all channels. So, it's my job to work with the agency from start to finish, from the production shoot to feedback on the assets to distributing the assets to our other teams and then disseminating the information to come to life across all channels. So it's in studio, paid, social, web. I'm forgetting so many right now, influencers, all the things. So it's a bit of a project management role, but it's also using my insights and context of being at the company for so long and knowing our brand consumers like the back of my hand at this point. Um, and so it's a lot of project management and being creative and strategic at the same time. And our current campaign, Fail With Us, is actually one of my favorite campaigns we've done to date. I don't know if you want me to dig into that a little bit
Yes,
more, but I
please. I
think it's
love
really
that.
interesting.
Yes.
Um, so again, SolidCore, very unique product, but at SolidCore, the goal is actually muscle failure. It's actually you're intended to shake, you're intended to break down and come back so much stronger. And we thought that was really interesting and unique to our brand. I think a lot of people hear the word failure and they think, I don't want to fail. Failure's bad, terrible connotation, get me away. And we want to flip failure on its head. We want to encourage failure. I think you only grow back stronger if you reach failure sometimes, especially muscle failure. But it kind of carries over into the workplace too, especially at startups. I think sometimes you're going to fail. It's okay. It's how you come back and learn and grow from it.
I think that's amazing. So what was so this was your marketing campaign message kind of is up. What were the um or kind of what were some of, I don't know if the tagline is the word, or like assets or kind of that you guys did to kind of, like you said, flip failure on its head?
Yeah, so we've been working with our amazing creative agency to come up with a few taglines, and a few of them are fail with us. And then there's like a little asterisk, and it says, another asterisk, it means you're doing it right, or it means you're coming back stronger, or um, there's a ton, honestly. We have a really long list of all the different alts,
And
but
I'm calling
at
you
the
out
end
on
of
the
the day,
spot to like remember all of that, but I'm just curious because I love that idea.
yeah, no, it's great. And it's honestly a really fun job as a brand marketer to make it come to life across all the different platforms because there's so much to unpack there.
I don't know if you know, I think his name is Jake Shane on TikTok. I don't know if you know. And
Yes.
he goes to like the Aloe studio and does Pilates, but like he's like shaking so much. Have you ever seen those videos?
Yes, I love the videos of him and Tate.
Yes. Okay. So that's what I'm thinking of in my head of like, because he shakes so much when he does
No,
Pilates. Like people are like, "Are you faking it?" And he's like, "No, that's like actually what like my muscle
no.
response is to it." And I've noticed that when I've done Pilates, especially on the reformer, like I'm shaking, it's like uncontrollable.
Yeah,
I'm doing it till failure. And so
yeah,
I think that's such a creative way to kind of take ownership of that. Um,
yeah. Like it's okay. It's actually the
yeah,
point. Like, don't
yeah.
stop.
That
It's a
means you're
good
doing the
thing.
workout right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, exciting. Well, and you said that's coming out sooner, that's already been launched.
It's been launched and it will be out for a few more months. So keep your eyes on all the channels to keep
Yes.
up with failure.
Yes. Okay, my kind of closing question here regarding your role within Solid Core is what are you most excited for either within your role or within like the future of brand marketing?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, Something I really love doing at Solid Core is being a part of the team that's in charge of expansion, especially out west. So I help a lot with brand awareness, especially with influencer marketing. And so I'm really excited to continue with our influencer marketing and our brand awareness, like top of the funnel uh, type of marketing, because I think, those that do love the product love it. They are huge brand advocates, but there's a huge population that may not. So I'm excited to continue doing just brand awareness campaigns and putting a lot of efforts to make sure everyone knows who we are and just keep doing fun campaigns to get the message across. I think that my favorite part of my job right now is brainstorming campaigns, being a part of the photo shoots and the video shoots, and just making great content along the way.
Amazing. Yes, I think, I mean, if I haven't said it already like 100 times, that is why I'm so intrigued by the Solid Core brand is because of how strong the community is. And I personally think that is going to be the future of just brand. And I think so many of us now crave more authenticity. And there's so many options that you have. I mean, even with workouts, there's so many options you have when it comes to picking one. And I think that the brands that are going to come out on top are the ones that have really strong community. With Sky Society, we do so much to build our community because I think that just makes you so much stronger as a brand in so many ways. I mean, having a good product obviously is essential, but also the community piece is so important.
No, completely agree. Definitely don't take your community for granted. They are the
Yeah.
best part.
Okay, Leora, my last question for you before we wrap up for the day is just any last advice that you want to share for women in marketing who would like to have a career similar to yours?
I love that question. I think I'm going to repeat what I already said and just be a sponge and absorb as much as you can. Have a really open mind, and most importantly, ask questions because you don't know what you don't know, and there's no shame in that. So that would be my advice.
Well, thank you so much, Leora. This has been an absolutely incredible episode and just so much fun getting to pick your brain. So thank you so much for coming on the Sky Society podcast.
Thank you so much. I've had a great time.